Hello again, Ness Hughes here with you for the fourth of this week's devotionals, reading together from the book of Ruth. Today we pick back up in the middle of the story. Ruth has returned with Naomi to Judah, and though they were both widowed, vulnerable in the ancient world setting, Ruth has met Boaz, a near male relative and a man of means. Today we learn that, like all good mother-in-laws, Naomi gets straight to work, securing this promising prospect who could redeem both their personal situation, but importantly also the line of Elimelech, whose name would be preserved if any sons are produced as a result of this in-house union. Some of these details we are about to read sound a bit weird, so I'll attempt to explain the cultural context along the way. And just a caution, it's best not to see these actions of Naomi as meddling or manipulative. Naomi, who was once helpless and hopeless, has rightly interpreted their collision with Boaz as God's provision for their redemption, and so she works toward this hopeful end. Let me start in chapter 3, verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is our relative. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovering his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer for our family." Now, what's going on here? Is Ruth trying to entrap Boaz? No, these are the ancient customs that made sense within their culture. What is happening here is actually a marriage proposal. If we read from Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 8, which says, "Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine." In this verse from Ezekiel, God is speaking to Jerusalem, and in relation to that passage and how it helps us understand Ruth's actions with Boaz, we understand that this strange incident with the cloak covering is a sign of promise, covenant binding. And this is what is happening between Ruth and Boaz. She is asking for and offering binding promise. It's a marriage proposal. Also notice in verse 9 the use of that phrase, guardian redeemer. We heard it first yesterday, actually, from verse 20 in chapter 2, and it's a central relational dimension of the whole book. I had introduced the Levirate law to you yesterday. This is no doubt a foundational background. But as I also said, by the time of this story, the practice of this law had widened to allow other male relatives to redeem widows from their extended family unit. So more is going on here than just preserving heritage by trying to produce an heir, which was the explicit benefit of the Levirate law. The guardian redeemer, though, is seen as a rescuer, relieving much more like economic stress, taking on family debt, paying off mortgages, even securing family land or redeeming debts into slavery. And so when Ruth and Naomi look at Boaz as guardian redeemer, they have a comprehensive rescue and relief in view. They were destitute, but in Boaz, they have hope of full redemption. personal relief as well as the protection of Elimelech's name. Before we see how this plays out, I just want to pause at this lovely foreshadowing that we're given of the kind of redemption God has for his whole people. His Saviour King, Jesus, who will come from the line being preserved in our story, will bring comprehensive relief and rescue. The Christian faith is not just about a ticket out of hell into heaven, though of course it does promise salvation. In Jesus, we have more than just pardon. We have the full experience of the kingdom life. The love of God that moves him toward redemption is a generous love with full concern for our whole selves and our eternal lives. This is the type of generous love we're seeing typified in Boaz, whose concern is for his whole family's name as well as the merciful care of Ruth and Naomi. Let's read on now in the story and see his response to Ruth, picking up now in verse 10. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." Well, that all sounds very lovely, but there's a problem. It turns out Boaz is not the closest relative. This is the hiccup I had said was coming. But Boaz, who shows a great display of family loyalty, wisely navigates the discussion with the actual closest male relative, and that's what happens next, taking us now into chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention, and I suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion and Mahlon. I've also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with this property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." To our modern ears, this all sounds very archaic. Men don't acquire wives and land. That's actually offensive in our modern age. But staying within the cultural context of the day, we see that Boaz, Ruth, and Naomi are all operating within these norms faithfully. Boaz has made a way to be Ruth and Naomi's guardian redeemer. He has secured the land and his right to marry Ruth, just as Naomi had hoped. As I said to you on day one, this is an action-packed short story with microscopic detail. And it's in those details we see clearly that Ruth shows sacrificial love and loyalty to Naomi, sacrificing her own family and hometown as she moves back toward God and his people with her. We see that Naomi, who was desperate and bitter, actually sees the opportunity provided for her under God's generous hand, and she works toward that fruitful future. And Boaz, who needed for nothing, is gentle and merciful and shrewd in how he ensures the longevity of the line of Elimelech and preserves the lives of Ruth and Naomi. Having now gotten over the hump of the climax of the complication in this story, we are well and truly headed for the resolution, and we'll return together tomorrow to see how this story concludes. I'll see you then.